Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz trombonist Ryan Keberle. We caught up with him in early April 2020 during the Coronavirus Quarantine to talk about music and the surreal life we have now with no live jazz. He opened up about his 2020 CD Reverso, the Melodic Line. This cat has been hailed in the Downbeat International Critics Poll as the #1 rising star trombonist and has a loud voice on both his instrument and as a band leader. He's got great stories. Dig it.
Joe, how you doing, man?
Hey, good, man. Holding steady. How you holding up?
Yeah, same here. I was very fortunate to have escaped the confines of Brooklyn about 3 weeks ago when shit started getting hairy. My wife and I had a place up in the Catskills, so we've been extremely lucky and very grateful to have not been dealing with the madness down there, which from what my friends are telling me, it's pretty rough, So I've got a good friend who just had a kid last week amidst all this and was sick himself. Another friend who's got a teaching from home, got a 3-year-old running around, hadn't left his house in 2 weeks. It's just really, really intense.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's that way everywhere. So I figure having a minute to talk about music is going to be kind of a welcoming thing. So thanks for taking a minute out today.
For sure. My pleasure, man. Yeah, thanks for thinking of me.
You bet. So let's talk about Reverso, the Melodic Line. Talk to me a little bit about this project and kind of what your vision was and how people can pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really not just my vision. It's my vision along with my co-leader, Frank Busta, who is the pianist in the group and also the co-composer of our repertoire. And he is originally from Germany, but has lived in Paris for about 25 years and is very much embedded there with a wife and kids, and actually has his own recording studio called Studio Libretto, which is where we recorded both of our albums. And he and I met on a Dave Douglas session about 5 years ago. Dave, of course, runs the record label that my other project, Catharsis, has been on for quite a few years now. And Dave put together kind of an all-star band to do the first of what has become, I believe, a regular annual thing for him called the Subscriber Series. And it's a recording that he only makes available to his subscribers digitally. So Frank was on that album. Frank and Dave had also participated in a separate group, and that's how they met. And Frank and I got to talking and found we had a lot of shared interests, specifically classical piano, because I grew up my mom's a piano teacher, so grew up in a house where there was a lot of piano-centric music being made, and I myself still play piano to this day. And so we kind of hit it off and got to talking, and at the time there was a grant available called the French-American Exchange Grant, and it was a pretty sizable grant, and we thought, well, if we're lucky enough to get it, why not try to make something happen? So we applied with this idea of writing music inspired by classical composers, and our first album was inspired by Ravel, and then, of course, the subsequent album by Les Six. And we got that grant initially and put together a band with cello, trombone, piano, and drums. And the drummer on that first album was Jeff Ballard, so that was a huge kind of opportunity for us to get to play with one of our heroes. And Jeff definitely didn't fail to bring it. It was such a treat to get to record with him and hang with him for a few days. And unlike, I think, a lot of grant-funded programs or projects, this band has really not only lasted, but it's really thrived over the years since then. We've been touring regularly throughout the U.S. and throughout Europe. And last spring, we had a few off days in Europe, so we decided to record our second album. And so that's the album that we're talking about now, and it's music inspired by this group of composers called Les Six, some of whom most people are familiar with, like Darius Milhaud, who was Brubeck's composition teacher in California many years ago, and Francis Poulenc, and there was even a female member of the group, which was very, very unusual at that time, named Germaine Taillefer, and I found her music to be particularly inspiring, and so I wrote my music inspired by her solo piano music, or chamber music as well. But we still have, and the group is slightly different now. It's a trio, so we've gotten rid of the drums for a number of reasons, part of which was just kind of logistics It's much easier to tour with 3 people. It allows us to play venues that don't have drum sets, and a lot of the venues we've been playing recently have been classical venues or kind of crossover venues for audiences who aren't really used to hearing drum set, and for venues that don't have a drum set in their backline. So it's helped kind of facilitate that as well. But all that to say, it was like a fairly organic process, unlike a lot of grant-funded groups, and it's really kind of taken on a life of its own and moved well beyond the original impetus, and very excited to see where things take us from here.
So you were born and raised in Spokane. You were surrounded by music. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your childhood and how jazz became your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of those very, very lucky musicians who kind of always knew I would be a musician in some respect. Not only are both of my parents professional musicians and music educators, but my grandparents on my mom's side are both music educators. In fact, my grandfather started my dad on the trumpet, and my dad is a professional trumpet player now. So it runs very deep in the family. I have an uncle who was a professional musician. My siblings were phenomenal musicians when they were younger in high school and college. So all that to say, I think I took a lot of it for granted at the time. Music was life. Music was everywhere. I started on the violin at the age of 4, started playing piano at the age of 5, and I think trombone around 10. And for most of my childhood, I played all 3 of those instruments, but eventually wound up giving up the violin just because it was too hard. I think I was more of a natural trombonist and the violin. I think also because around that time I was also really starting to get drawn into jazz, and the violin's place is much less obvious in the jazz world than the trombone. So, my dad is a jazz educator, and so many of my earliest opportunities were facilitated through either his university big band, playing with his big band whenever they needed an extra trombonist, even when I was in junior high still. And he also at that time was directing our local professional jazz band in Spokane called the Spokane Jazz Orchestra, which is actually a pretty cool organization. They've been around for almost 50 years and have a regular series, subscriber series each year. And so I was playing with them regularly in high school. So had a lot of very special opportunities at an early age, and most of which were very much centered around big band. So for me, my entry point into jazz was almost strictly big band music, Count Basie and Duke Ellington for starters, and kind of moving on from there. But it was always there for me, and even though my first year of college I actually spent thinking about double majoring out west in physics and music, I quickly learned that obviously there's kind of wasting my time not being in the practice room all the time, sitting in the computer lab thinking, why am I not shedding right now the trombone? So at that point, that would have been 1999, I transferred out to Manhattan School of Music in New York, and have been here ever since.
So what was the first live jazz show you ever saw that made you think, man, this is something I want to do?
That's really interesting. Like I said, it's one of those things that it was like such an integral part of my life. I don't recall ever having that aha moment, like, this is what I want to do. I think looking back, I just always assumed I would be doing it. But with that being said, almost exclusively my earliest jazz concerts were listening to my dad's college big band. He has a phenomenal program at a little tiny liberal arts school in Spokane called Whitworth University, when their big band rivals that of all the major public universities in the region. But every fall he would bring out a special guest, and my dad, being a real big band nut, would very early on was bringing out the kind of last surviving members of the great big band. So I got to hear Marshall Royal play before he passed away, the lead alto saxophonist with Count Basie's orchestra. I got to hear Bill Berry play, who played trumpet with Duke Ellington for many years. Carl Fontana, Slide Hampton, Jimmy Heath, Joe Lovano, all these legends. And so for me, that was really my opportunity to kind of get a glimpse into what an actual professional jazz musician was like, personality-wise and getting to hang with them and eat dinner with them when they were in town. So those were very formative experiences. And the other kind of exclusive, being in Spokane, there just were not that many opportunities. There are some working musicians in Spokane, but most of them teach. I don't know if there was anyone when I was growing up that just exclusively played music for a living. So really the only other opportunity at that time was a jazz festival in northern Idaho called the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival, and it's a school big band jazz festival. It's actually the largest of its kind, I think, in the country for middle school, high school, and college big bands. And you go down there with your band, you play for a judge, they adjudicate you, but then they have these concerts at night. And the concerts were just unbelievable representations of who's who in the business. It was Lionel Hampton's band and all of his buddies. So I got to hear Gene Harris's quartet with Ray Brown and Herb Ellis and Jeff Hamilton. Got to hear Al Gray play before he died. I remember that year it was like a trombone tribute year, so that it was a all-star trombone group with Al Gray, Bill Watrous, and Carl Fontana all sharing the same stage. And so every year there would be similar kind of all-star concerts presented. And so between those two opportunities, even though they were fleeting, a couple days, couple nights a year, that definitely made a lasting impression on me.
So what do you like best about being a musician, about creating music?
That's a tough question. I mean, I guess part of it is so much of it is a part of who I am, and it's always been a part of who I am. I can't imagine not having it. So, like things that are just inherently a part of your life, sometimes you don't reflect on a question like that. But with that being said, I can't imagine not having that outlet. I mean, the creative outlet for me has always been my primary source of kind of release on every level, physically, mentally, emotionally. Ever since I was a little kid, practicing, it never really felt like a chore or a job. It's just what I love to do. So to get to more or less pursue and spend your time doing what you love is obviously a real, it's just a real blessing. I mean, I feel extremely fortunate to have that opportunity every day, and I always try to remind myself of that, and especially during a time like this, I think we all have a bit more free time than we did, say 3 weeks ago, and just trying to stay motivated to use that time to do what I love. I'm actually finding it not as easy as I would have thought, just to kind of carve out that time. I'm not sure if it's a lack of inspiration right now, or just I'm definitely staying busy where I'm at, but I'm also teaching virtually online still at the university I'm at. But all that to say, I really just can't imagine not being a musician. I think my favorite things about being a professional musician are twofold. Number one, it's never really knowing what your next gig's going to be, or never really knowing what next year is going to bring. Early on that can be a bit daunting, but once you start to understand that there's always going to be work, there's always going to be opportunity, it's really exciting to think about, a year from now, I have no idea who I might be playing with or what recording session I might get called to do. It's, and there's always new exciting opportunities around the corner. So that's really, that keeps a job just so fresh and exciting. And then I think the other thing is probably the communicative spirit of music. I mean, music is a language. I know it's somewhat of a cliche these days, but the longer I am a practicing musician and also an educating musician, the more I'm beginning to understand just how real that saying is, and how you can actually extrapolate that saying to so many different uses and applications of our music. I mean, it truly is a language. And there's something about communicating on a stage with other musicians, and then also, just as importantly, for listeners. You take away the listeners, it's not that you can't create the music, but you're not really communicating the music. It's a one-sided conversation without the audience. And so for me, this time we're in right now has been kind of shockingly abrasive because we obviously don't have an audience. And personally, I don't find the virtual audience to be all that inspiring. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, maybe highlighted for me just how important the audience is for what we do.
So I guess I'm going to piggyback off of that and kind of ask more directly. When the music starts back up and the crowds come back out, musicians are on the stage, what do you hope both musician and fan realize from this time of absence away from live music?
Well, I hope that especially young people and old people realize that a virtual concert is no replacement for a real concert, for an in-person live concert. There is no replacement for that. No matter how good the cameras and mics get, no matter how good the internet connection gets, there is no replacement for live music in the same room with acoustic instruments or really good, electric instruments, creating sound waves that move through the air in organized and coordinated ways to touch an audience, to tell a sonic story to their audience. There is no replacement for that. I think also I'm hoping perhaps a deeper appreciation of just how detrimental the streaming industry has been, because now that musicians are not able to perform, there literally is no way to make a living other than teaching lessons online. Because, say, even 20 years ago, there still would have been income coming in through selling your recorded music. In fact, say 40, 50 years ago, that income probably would have been greater than the income made performing in live settings. But nowadays, given the utter, just complete disappearance of any income from recorded music, live performances is really all we've got. And I think this has just been a real wake-up call to promoters, presenters, audiences, certainly the artists themselves, as to how dependent we are and starting to maybe think about other ways to make money or other ways to encourage our listeners to support us besides buying a ticket. Be it subscriptions to podcasts, be it, paying for downloaded music, paying for streaming music. Maybe someone will come out of this and offer a jazz streaming service that you actually pay some real money for. I mean, at least the equivalent of what you would have paid for a record 30 years ago. I've heard talk about that for years, so maybe this will be a motivation for someone to actually make it happen.
So my final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, and probably now, with everything going on, this is probably a more reflective time. Who do you think you are?
Wow. That is a deep question. Well, I've been realizing this for a few years now. I'm a performer. I think some creative artists, it's really about the process and just the act of creating, and I love that process. But I don't think that I would have, and I'm experiencing it right now. I don't think that I would have the inspiration or the motivation to create without an audience to share that with. So. Yeah, I think that I'm just realizing that I really maybe first and foremost am a performer of music, a creator of live music for an audience.
Cool. Ryan, hey, man, you've been on my radar for quite a while. Thank you for taking some time out to talk with me on jazz. It's quite a time in our human history, so, hopefully we can all get back out there and enjoy the music. I know I'm a little lost, too, without having the chance to at least, see something live, so I understand what you're talking about for sure.
Totally. Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Washington, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ryan for his time, energy, and music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.